Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cybersecurity podcast. Welcome to the show, and what a week it's been. We wanted to have this special podcast to talk to parents and teachers and educators and administrators about all the stuff that's been happening. And of course, we wanted to talk about computer infections and rampant cyber fraud that people are seeing as they're working from home more. And of course, privacy invasions, because guess what? Privacy rights still stand during a pandemic, during this crisis. We certainly don't want to be in a situation months from now where we're looking back and we're saying, hey, you know what? That was a pivotal moment for identity theft, and we surrendered our kids' identities, and all of this happening because of the pressure to adopt some rapacious technology. But before I get ahead of myself, I wanted to introduce our special guests today, and first of all, behind the scenes and now in front of the scenes, we have Stephen Hurley, who's pulling this whole thing together. He's created the platform, and he's pulling levers, pressing buttons to make sure that this show is not just live, but also will be available on demand. He's also made it possible for callers to call in at 647-812-5894 and participate in our show. Now this will come as a surprise to no one, but this number will not work if you're calling after today, after the live edition of the show. So if you're listening to this on demand, don't bother calling. Next in line, we have Diana Barbosa. And Diana has been a guest previously, as has Steve Abouldahab and Tim King. All of you gentle folk have been kind enough to lend your ears and your time to our Cybersecurity podcast in the past. And because you are all four of you, education experts and professionals, I thought, what a better way to have a bit of a panel and discuss all of the things that are important. And before I hand the floor over to you, I wanted to give a shout out to frontline workers and essential services for everything they're doing, because, as we're thinking about the new normal of us staying at home and parenting, and of course, the educators who are trying to reinvent models for reaching out to kids and making kids feel appreciated and making kids feel cared for. We want to remember that people are out there exposing themselves to things. So yeah, it's not the end of times. It's definitely an abrupt and forced shift in thinking that should have taken place a long time ago. But here we are trying to bring education to audiences across the country, and certainly other educators are doing this around the world. Stephen Hurley, I wanted to ask you first and foremost, since you're looking at a different dashboard than what I'm looking at, are there any tips that our listeners need to know about?
I'm just going to give out those numbers again, if you don't mind, Claudiu. Thanks for doing this, because we had someone actually had the stream before us that refused to give it up. So that was my fault. But we're on live in two streams now. We're broadcasting live on DS 106 Radio. So if you're listening on DS 106 Radio and you are in North America, or you're listening on Voice Ed Radio and you are in North America, you can call 647-812-5894. That's 647-812-5894. I'm going to be screening calls as they come in, and that's pretty well everyone. And again, yeah, if you are listening after the fact, you can try those numbers. You can call me. You might wake me up, but feel free.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I was I flew in from the United States a week ago, and I flew in through Orlando Airport, where just a couple of days ago there were reports of 3 workers having tested positive for the coronavirus. And I was thinking about the fact that I always insist on the pat down, and and this time around I went through the pat down as I always do because of the obvious privacy issues with those what used to be called naked scanners, and I made sure I asked the gentleman about his experience, and he said, "Oh, you're absolutely the first person and the only person today to ask for this." And as he was putting on all kinds of layers of things to protect himself and possibly me from him, but that made me think about the fact that there's so many people who are potentially scared and uncertain about the times that we live in, and are making decisions about changes to their regular behavior that may in fact compromise privacy. Now, I'm not saying that there's a privacy issue that's guaranteed about the scanners. That's for a different episode. But when we think about the things that we typically are doing on a daily basis in schools, in classrooms, and in our regular interruptions, how many of those have changed in a way where we're simply saying, hey, you know what, forget about the privacy concerns, forget about the filters. What do I need to know right now, because we need to survive this pandemic? So with that, I wanted to turn to Tim King, who's on the line, and he's been in the front lines of education for a long time in more ways than one. What are your thoughts, Tim, about the balance between privacy and safety?
I think that it's something that we haven't really thought about much in education. I think it's something that we kind of assume the corporate tie-ups that we have will ensure. I think the leaning on that has kind of atrophied our ability to look at privacy concerns. And especially now, because we've got that atrophied sense of looking after our own privacy, it really does seem to be disappearing. There's a story, the US government is asking all of the, Facebook and all the big social media giants if they can get active GIS location data for people to see if they're social distancing or not. And the minute I saw something like that, I thought, well, that's a very interesting use of technology and simultaneously quite terrifying.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we're likely to see more of. There's unbridled innovation. People are trying to solve problems, and in many cases, those who are paying attention, who do have some privacy concerns, will sometimes be shocked at what they see. We saw that with what was it, a Google interface this week. Does anyone remember a report about a Google, was it a testing map or something to that effect, that had some sort of privacy issues associated with it? Did anyone see that?
I didn't.
The next, yeah. So the next question is for you, Diana. Diana, what do you think administrators and education professionals should be looking at when they're trying to balance that need for obviously student safety with the privacy requirements that we'll need to deal with in the future from a student data collection and use and even disposal perspective? Are there things that administrators and decision makers should be thinking of?
So I'm going to answer that question a little differently than I would have if you had asked me this question, 5 weeks ago. And it's because of the current situation we're in with the pandemic, and the fact that right now we're having educators in a position where they're not in the classroom. And as far as I know, across the country, it's unsure when they will be back in the classroom, or even what the role will be if the school year does go on in many different sort of ways and forms. There's all kinds of things happening, because I think with this, the pandemic and how we're dealing with it has really pushed a lot of conversations to happen and a lot of testing to occur that we just were not prepared for. And that ranges from, organizations that we're still experimenting with work from home, weren't quite sure what to do it. Now they've had no choice but to have remote work take place. And then from the education system, it's really pushed the conversation around what does e-learning look like? Is it appropriate? What forms are we using? What courses are we offering? I was just, funny story on social media yesterday. There were some parents commenting on, one of the courses available right now for high school students in Ontario is a travel and tourism course. And they're saying that's kind of ironic in a situation where all travel and tourism is shutting down. So I thought that's just kind of a little bit of a funny thing. But as well as I think that right now we educators, administrators, and parents, and I'm one of those parents. I've let my kids sort of have the free roam of the internet this week, but I'm saying, school's supposed to start on Monday, so we're going to have to lock it down a little bit. And it's how do you choose what you're engaging with or what you're allowing your kids to engage with. And I think that right now we're in a position where we need to go back to those basic privacy and cyber safety rules, what we call, cyber hygiene or cyber immunization, and kind of go back to the basics and use our common sense. So everybody is, again, with good intentions, sharing links and sharing free resources. But once you're in there, you need to stop and think about them critically. What kind of information am I giving them access to? Is this an educational app that wants my contact list? Why do you need my contact list? Why do you need access to my camera? And I think that right now is really a time to look at those basic principles again, because it's so many people are being impacted and so many people are having to make decisions quickly, that we don't want to forget some of these basic safety, privacy concepts. Because I think it's a difficult time to ask administrators and teachers to start thinking more broadly. I think it's time to start having those conversations and definitely think about it. But when you go from I need to make a decision Monday morning as to what I'm going to give my students or children access to, we need to go back to those basics. And I know, Claudio, you've been great when working with ICTC at, trying to create some information and disseminate some of that information. And we're going to be making that information available again. And it's just those basic things.
And towards the end of this podcast, I want to go over some of the resources that are available to educators and parents, because we do want people to walk away from this podcast with either something to look forward to or some resources to go and look for. One of the questions that came in, and this is from an educator, is it started with a statement, and it was the fact that when educators or teachers are at work, they are simply given tools to Edtech Tools, innovative technologies, etc. They're basically they come from the Ministry of Education. They're given to the school board. The school board's handing them over to teachers. And the question is, should the responsibility for the use, the safe use, the ethical use of some of these EdTech tools rest with teachers? Because really, that's the buck stops with the teachers. They're the ones who are exposing children to these new technologies, but should that responsibility also be shared with parents, because they need to take an interest in the kinds of technologies and the kinds of privacy norms that we are seeing now on an annual basis, because we're seeing new technology. So that question is for Steve Abouldahab. You're a teacher, you're an educator, you have a solid grasp of privacy, and so Steve, where should parents be reminded of safe ways to connect, not just to school provided technologies, but also when parents are encouraged to work with their children to find educational resources to survive this the crisis, so to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Claudio. A few things. I think that we're at a critically important time right now where things are moving very quickly and decisions are going to be made very quickly. And so I think it's incumbent on the ministries of education across Canada and school boards, divisions, districts to work together to have a unified response. I think that if those entities work together with some nonprofits or private organizations like our own that are trying to support them in finding the tools that will best enable their students to learn safely from home, then that'll be a very effective approach. With regards to parents, I think that parents will have lots of questions. I think that, again, whatever the school boards and the ministries put out, that parents will inevitably trust. And so it's very important that it's clearly communicated to parents how these tools are protecting their children's privacy. And I also think that school boards and and ministries need to be accountable or responsible for allowing parents to ask them questions. So having a venue for parents to say, hey, I've got this tool that I want to use with my child. Is it okay to use with them? And I think teachers need that ability as well. And that's why I think that perhaps in this situation, public education needs to step outside of its own capacity and really utilize the resources that are out there to help support them in identifying which tools can be the most effective while still protecting their child's privacy. Because, for myself, I'm an early adopter of technology. When I was in the classroom just a couple of years ago, I loved finding new tools and using them with my students. But the problem was that I didn't take the time to actually review all of the agreements. And so I didn't really know what risk I was putting my students in terms of their information being shared. And so I don't think there are a lot of teachers who really consider that because they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to be evaluating all of those tools. So I think the responsibility lies on all of us, but I think that upper administration needs to really pool all of the resources that are out there and look for supports to be able to identify the best way to move forward with these tools.
I think that's a great time to remind teachers and administrators and parents, certainly, whenever they find new educational tools, even though they might be the sexiest, snazziest, most attractive thing, before turning it over to a child or a student, always read the privacy policy. It's really important, more important now than ever, I would argue. And of course, make sure that you adopt proper password management practices. Make sure you use unique passwords. Make sure you talk to your kids about using passphrases and store them securely. And these are behavioral things that didn't always take. They weren't always front and center, and so I want to turn to a veteran of the industry, and not to make you sound like a dinosaur, Stephen Hurley, but you've been a teacher and an educator for a long time. How do you see the status quo having changed in the past few decades from how things used to be?
Well, I'll weigh in on that, and then I'll tell you we have a caller waiting as well.
Excellent.
So that's good. Yeah, I remember the early days of technology. The thing that I remember most about that is the fact that many of the things that we did as teachers, we kind of came up with on our own. We designed our own databases and spreadsheets, and there was very little software out there that really was demanding from a security privacy perspective, because it was all on our machines. And I think now that the internet is in full force, and we did have to teach kids about cybersecurity, and it was usually they were usually conversations about meeting people online and being safe with your identity, not giving your Visa number out unless you knew who it was going to, for example, like things that we would think are crazy now, but they weren't the subtle, nuanced, actually under the radar type of things that we're concerned about now. So yeah, I'm not sure how I would handle it if I were going into a classroom for the first time now, but I do remember it being, it was a frontier. We considered ourselves pioneers, but we really didn't have to bump up against some of the things that that educators that just want to use the technology are bumping up against.
Absolutely.
If I can jump in there quickly, Claudio, because I think to your point, Stephen, and a lot of teachers out there, that are wondering, where do I go? There are actually some really great resources already available. It's just hard to find it because there's so much information on the internet. It's overwhelming, right? But Common Sense Media, if you were to go to their website, they have a fantastic privacy evaluation checklist that they use for apps, and so you can use that as one tool to sort of look, and you can read what they review and how the various different apps or platforms have rated, and you can read why. The Future of Privacy Forum, which is another American organization, they have a student privacy pledge, and what they do is they have a list of things that edtech companies do and do not pledge that they're going to do with regards to student data, and they sign that, and that holds them accountable. And so they have 406 signatories, including Apple and Google Edu and others. So those are good indications of sort of starting points. So there is information; it's just hard to find it. So I'm hoping with the list that Claudio is collecting, we can start to have a resource and a database of these kinds of places that people can go.
That's right. Thank you for that, Steve. And absolutely, that signal to noise ratio is a problem nowadays, and we're all going to be doing what we can. So towards the end of this podcast, we're going to go around and maybe collect some other resources that we'll be making available on the Knowledge Flow webpage, and certainly the Knowledge Flow Facebook page. But for now, let's go to our caller.
Go ahead, caller.
Hi, it's Alana King calling.
Hi, Alana.
I'm calling because I have a different perspective. In fact, I would probably describe myself as the nightmare teacher that you're all imagining right now that needs to be more cautious about privacy and security. I've taught senior level media arts and creative writing for about 10 years. I've also been an online e-learning teacher for my board for the last 10 or 12 years, and I've written curriculum for the ministry and the e-learning platform. So I come to this thinking, yep, I'm okay with privacy and security, of course, but at some point, I think we need to take the training wheels off. And in grade 11 and 12, I want the students to be able to self-indicate when they're ready to do that. And I get really upset when I hear about things like Knowledge Ontario 10 years ago and OSAPAC losing their power to do all of the management of privacy and security for me and my students so that we can continue to be creative and innovative.
Does anyone want to comment?
Yeah, I will. So this is Diana, and I think that I was thinking along the same lines, Alana, around, your question a little bit ago, Claudio, had been, does the responsibility lie on the teacher or the parents? And I think that it's a shared responsibility, and it also needs to be put down as far as the students. And we start, like I said, we've got programs now that start like as early as a kindergarten to talk about, information security. And you talked about taking those training wheels off, and I think that's a really good way to think about it, because we need to be able to equip our students who are going to become, young adults and adults to make these decisions and pass on the information. And with that as well, I find that, and this could apply to any topic, it's always the huge pendulum swing, right? So we either go from, and to use privacy as the example, it's complete openness and mayhem, and all our information about everything is out there, and they're using it for all kinds of things. Or bam, lock it down, and then you don't have access to anything.
Exactly.
So And I mean, one of the challenges that we have as ICTC, and one of the things that we do is a lot of research, and it's difficult for us to do research. It's difficult for us to do evaluation on, at the EdTech and how valuable it is in the classroom, because we haven't been able to do it long term because we can't track students, because the student data, again, for the most part, is very protected. But there is some data that we could possibly collect that wouldn't be putting anybody at risk. And I know, Claudio, I don't know, you might be falling off your chair hearing me say things like that, but I think that, again, I mentioned earlier, I think this situation right now will push us to have more critical conversations, and will hopefully push a combination of industry, education, not-for-profits, to figure out a way to disseminate the information, to create tools like you're talking about, Claudio, where we can determine, how can we guide teachers, students, parents to make good decisions, but hopefully as well to come to a place where, again, the pendulum is somewhere in the middle, and where we can all, accept responsibility for the role that we play in the data that we do want to provide and don't.
And thank you for that, Diana, and thank you for your comment and question, Alana. I think everything comes down to trust, and if we can have some measure of trust, we can take the training wheels off. I think some of the things that have taken place over the past few years is that there's innovative new business models that do try to bridge that gap and provide added dimensions to the information that we are able to collect about students and about the success of some of these technologies, etc. Where I get concerned, and my thing is consent. It revolves around informed consent. That consent has to be meaningful. Parents have to play a part, and parents do have a responsibility to educate themselves so they can understand at least where to look inside a privacy policy that should be ringing those bells, because so many EdTech solutions have been found lacking. And in fact, with respect to trust, of course, we've got things like Steve mentioned, where every company out there, every EdTech company out there is taking a pledge. But what that pledge means is up in the air. So it doesn't mean that they've conducted an independent review. It doesn't mean that they're providing a transparency report of a professional audit. As far as I know, my team is the only team in Canada that provides EdTech audits, for example. Not to mention a shout out, but there really isn't that level of awareness in the professional sphere of how to look at an EdTech solution and say, you know what, maybe you shouldn't be sharing this data in the back end with data aggregators and monetizing even metadata, or allowing people to work from home from outside the safe perimeter of the organization, just because they happen to be developers that want to work that way. So along those lines, there's any number of issues that are or should be a trigger for parents and educators. And I know that Tim King, you share some of those views. What are your perspectives there?
I think you talk a lot about how it's like on a micro level, where with teachers and students and parents. And I think that there are huge systemic things in place here that, and we've talked about this before. For instance, a lot of boards, I'm not even sure that they have a privacy officer, and if they do, what their role isn't clear. In a lot of cases, the company is providing the EdTech. I'm not clear on what the details are there. No one is. And so I'm left wondering, with all these giant systemic processes in place designed to keep things under blankets and lack of transparency, I mean, you can say the buck stops at a teacher, but if we're all working in the dark here, then it's very, very difficult, as Steve said, to find, actionable data that we can work off of. So as much as I like the idea that we've all got to take more personal responsibility, and I believe we do, I think these are very murky waters with a lot of money in play and a lot of interests. And we also need to recognize how difficult that is to deal with.
Absolutely, and so from my perspective, as I'm choosing what to present to my kids and to my audiences, I say, okay, you know what? Last year we didn't know as much about this technology as we know this year, and I choose not to share it. But where the buck starts is with the vendors and the school boards, and certainly the ministry is relying on external expertise. But a lot of that money that changes hands is obviously adding to the complexity of who's incentivized to do what. So that's really, as you correctly pointed out, that's really where things start, and that's where the accountability should end. That's it trickles up, as we know, in all organizations. So just in the interest of time, I see that we're coming close to the 30-minute mark that typically marks the end of our podcasts, and today is a special day, of course. But I do want to make sure that our listeners walk away with something tangible and something useful, and perhaps the sense that if they come back to our podcast, they can again find a place where they can submit questions and they can get answers. So to our listeners, make sure that you are submitting comments to our social media posts. Our participants today are our guests are all sharing these posts, and so we are always watching for questions and concerns, and certainly anecdotes. We always appreciate those. So I'm gonna go around the table and ask our guests to chime in and say, and tell us a little bit about where parents can find safe educational homeschooling resources, and perhaps even more importantly, where can teachers who sometimes feel like they are forced to use a particular solution that's handed down to them by the school board, where can they find some of those best and ideal resources? And I know that Steve Abouldahab, you have no shortage of advice and resources. So let's start with you.
Thanks, Claudio. Well, I did mention the two resources that I thought were good places to look, and we can link to them later on as starting points anyways. Just to finish off, I have a few pieces of advice or recommendations. I think the first thing that the ministry and school boards do before they launch any kind of online learning system is have training for students, teachers, parents on cyber hygiene, how to be safe online, how to avoid fraud, because we're seeing a lot of that stuff going around right now, a lot of fraudulent emails, people getting caught up in phishing scams and whatnot. So I think it's absolutely essential for the first thing that happens before anyone starts any online learning is for them to have cybersecurity training. Next, I would say that I would make it, I would ask that school boards and ministries make themselves available to teachers like Alana who want to use a tool, and help them vet the tools. They need to have the capacity. Maybe they need to shift things and start to have the capacity to be able to take requests from teachers who are wanting to use tools, and then they go out and find the information or partner with other organizations like our own, and figure out whether these tools are safe and come up with contracts with these organizations. I think that's a responsibility that the ministry and the school boards need to take on and make it easier for the parents and the teachers. And just a couple of quick tips for teachers or parents even who are looking to use tools. One thing to check is in the URL at the very top. If there's no S on the end of HTTP, then that means that it's not secure. So nothing you put in there is encrypted. So don't put any information that's identifiable on that website, or perhaps just avoid it. Quickly check even if the Edtech tool has a privacy policy, because if it may not even have a privacy policy, and that is a huge red flag. And then the last thing I would say is just take a second to look if it's a commercial app. So if they make the majority of their business is commercial and it's a free tool, then there's a really good chance that they're using your data or your child's data to make money. And so perhaps steer clear from those commercial organizations and maybe in the direction more of a company that's dedicated to education.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Certainly, there's no shortage of data aggregation that's happening in edtech today, and it's all geared to make money. And just as a quick aside, just because they charge money doesn't mean that they don't make money in the back end. So they're now using multiple streams of income. One of our favorite partners at Knowledge Flow Cybersafety Foundation is the ICTC, as you correctly pointed out, Steve, and we do love to work with the ICTC. So Diana, as the ICTC puts out more guidance and more leadership, we're going to continue to list them and link to them on our Knowledge Flow Facebook page. What can people expect to find in the weeks to come?
So we're doing a couple of different things. We are looking at, right now, we've actually just started a fun campaign and a contest for kids around cybersecurity, and that you can find through our social media feeds. I'm also going to go back to the point I made about getting just back to your basic safety concerns, and I'm going to point to the webinars that you helped us with almost a year ago, but that data is still 100% valid, and they're available through the ICTC YouTube channel. We're also going to be releasing some upcoming webinars to do the refresh, to give the opportunity for people to ask questions. And I also want to echo something that Steve said around, I'd caution parents or anybody making too many decisions out of, downloading new apps or purchasing new ed tech just because they're having the sense of, oh my gosh, school's supposed to start, especially in Ontario on Monday. What do I do? Take the time to think about what you're getting into, take the time to read those privacy policies, make those decisions, because I think, and I spoke to this in our previous podcast, this really talks to that digital literacy piece. And I think that we will do a disservice to, the value that can be found in some ed tech, or the value that can be found in e-learning, if we think that giving people just the technology or access to it is going to solve the problem. That kind of learning needs to be it needs a wraparound. It needs some work to happen before you use it. It needs some work to happen after you use it. You need to know how to think critically when using it. You need to know how to interact with it to get the most out of it. And one of the things that's making me, I guess, a little bit nervous right now is that the focus is on let's get the information out. But what are our kids going to be doing with that information? Is it going to be a valuable experience? So I would say, take it slow. I honestly don't have a problem with having my kids tomorrow morning, instead of, driving them directly to the e-learning, to have them cleaning my backyard. I think there's a lot of learning that can happen from taking responsibility and learning some of the household skills that they'll need that they don't normally get. So again, that might throw some of my education folks into a bit of a spin, but I think that proceed with caution. Look at all the opportunities. The technology is not the only answer, and it definitely is not the answer as a standalone. It's the computer's not going to solve the problem. You need to have a holistic look at everything surrounding it.
That's excellent. You know what? Now that you mentioned it, I did want to make that point earlier, that part of our education, part of our cyber safety education, and this may come as a surprise to many, we're not obsessed with security and privacy. Just because we're a hammer, not everything is a nail, and so. Much of our programming and the programming that we encourage other educators to present and to release is geared around responsible use of online resources. We teach kids how to be useful, not just to be leeches, not just to identify clickbait, but also to find the amazing resources and communities that can be joined online so that you can make a difference. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity for parents to sit down with kids and say, hey, you know what? Let's see what Kiva is doing. Let's see. And by the way, a quick shout out, join the Kiva Cyber Safety Champions team and do make a difference. But what's UNICEF doing? What are Doctors Without Borders doing? These are amazing things that parents can use some of their time and sit down with kids rather than expecting the internet to be a babysitter during this time of crisis. They should learn together to say, hey, let's go to the site. Let's first read the privacy policy. Let's create a pseudonymous account with a unique password, and let's see how we can contribute. Tim King, what are your final thoughts?
Just to follow up on what Diana was saying there, the New York Times had a really good article by a mom saying, I'm not going to be teaching my kids while they're off because I don't know how to do that. And it ended up being a really interesting article. And the response I was seeing on social media was a lot of parents were frankly relieved, because you keep hearing things, especially from the Ontario government, saying giving parents the tools they need and everything. And that also implies in addition to trying to work from home, which is going to be difficult enough, you're also supposed to work your way through all of the curriculum and become an effective teacher of your own children while all this is going on. That's a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. So I think parents can, first of all, just take a breath. And, like Diana said, there are so many different ways you could interact with your kids and have a teachable moment with them that isn't around the curriculum that, quite frankly, most people have no familiarity with. As far as Edtech tools go, I don't know. I mean, my board in particular has a really well-developed wall garden around Google Apps for Education. It's all vetted stuff. It's in a safe, closed login environment where we do not share passwords. When you want to do research on there, the librarians in the board have connected us to vetted research places. So you're getting EDU content, not whatever the internet throws at you because it can sell you something. The last suggestion I'd have is maybe going to get me in trouble, but talk to teachers. If you've got a question, shoot your kid's teacher an email, contact them. You've probably got an online contact tool. I've been talking to my kids all week, and it was March break, but it was a pretty exceptional March break that wasn't really a March break at all. And I think most teachers would want to help. So while all sorts of strange things are going on system side that we don't understand and we've had no participation in, the teachers still want to help. So leverage that expertise. That would be my advice.
And you know what? That's fantastic to hear that in particular your school board is handling things correctly and is properly protecting and reviewing the edtech that is then passed on to teachers and then students, because that's fairly rare. And I wish that there was more information sharing around that. Maybe there should be a tighter knit group of administrators who are saying, hey, you know what are you seeing? Or you've spent, I don't know, 2 months auditing this particular tool. How did you secure it? And that kind of information sharing at those administrative and decision-making levels is absolutely critical right now, where time is of the essence, and not everyone can go over the same steps of doing proper due diligence. And yesterday I saw that in the past couple of days, Ontario has released a learn at home curriculum and resources that are, as far as I can tell, they're optional. So the message clearly is to not necessarily boil the ocean and not try to stick too much to curricula, certainly not for parents. And as far as teachers are concerned, obviously it makes a lot of sense to remain in contact and in touch with kids, if only because it makes everyone feel better. Steve Hurley, what are your final thoughts?
I'm amazed at the expertise that is around this table. I'm overwhelmed by it. But my final thoughts would be to stay attuned to what your children are doing. I mean, it's a rule that I like to follow, and sometimes don't follow very well as a parent. But just because they are being called online more often now, and seems to be the mantra of this government. Well, they can learn online. Stay attuned to what they're thinking. Those moments of stress that you sense, and ask yourself the questions, not only about security and privacy, but about the wellness and what this means. Because I think we're in for the long haul here. I don't think this is going to be a short thing.
Thanks very much. And so that's a final shout out to all of you educators who are on the front lines, and the parents who are dealing with the minute by minute attention of students and kids all over the place. Do try to stay informed, stay away from misinformation, from clickbait. Do try to visit those trusted resources, and in particular, we are going to continue to share fun and educational resources on the Knowledge Flow page. We're going to continue sharing ICTC programs and checklists. Diana and I were talking about creating checklists for EdTech. Tim King has a fabulous blog and articles. Tim, if you wouldn't mind adding a direct link to that to today's post and the announcement about today's post. And everyone who's listening, please do share this. This will be available on demand in the hours or perhaps in the next day on Voice Ed Radio. Thank you for taking part today, and we'll see you and hear you next time.